Welcome to the Reimagining Leadership with AI webinar. My name is Pete Behrens, founder and CEO of the Agile Leadership Journey and originator of the AI Leadership Lab. The Agile Leadership Journey seeks to build better leaders. That is, leaders who operate more effectively amid complexity, uncertainty, and rapid change. And there's nothing more disruptive today than generative AI. But this webinar is not here to teach us generative AI, right? There's tons of resources on the internet to do just that. Our goal is instead to look at its implications and impacts to leadership itself, right? How is this affecting every aspect of leaders, or how will it? And we know it's probably guaranteed, right? It's going to penetrate or has penetrated every aspect of leadership and business. And if you think today that people say, hey, we've got answers, I would argue, I would disagree with that, right? The landscape is changing so fast that we formed this lab to really start to ask those questions. What is it and how is this impacting? It's not a matter of if, but when. And it's not going to be something you can necessarily wait for because it's happening right now. So in this brief hour, we hope to give you just a taste of some of the conversations, right? Our AI lab was created to form some of these questions. And I, along with three of my colleagues here who are advisors to our lab, are going to give you that little appetizer of those questions. So with that said, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Keene.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I'm Eric Keene. I'm with the National Centers for Environmental Information, part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States. Our mission is to understand the pulse of the planet. Basically, we take observations ranging from space weather to ocean properties to more terrestrial weather, and we look at what can we understand from the vast amounts of data that we're bringing in. So my experience with AI begins many years ago. Look, as we started to be overwhelmed by virtually a tidal wave of data and trying to understand what tools could we bring to bear to help us understand that huge amount of data. So I'm excited to talk about beyond how we use AI in science, now how AI is starting to influence leadership and our development going forward. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Nick.
Thanks, Pete. My name's Nick. I'm part of the Microsoft Industry Solutions Engineering team, where we focus on industrial AI to drive solving problems with our customers in the era of AI transformation in industries. The views today I express, they're my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation, no. But as a leader, my primary focus is integrating AI solutions and how we address customer needs. We have teams of co-engineering, co-innovators that partner side by side with our customer teams and help them solve problems like operational challenges. From the front lines to the executive boardrooms, AI is all over the place, and it's just enabling so many opportunities here in our future.
Thanks, Nick. And Pete.
Hey, everybody. I'm Pete Lunenfeld, the founder and CTO and CEO of Current Wave AI. I've been a lifelong CTO, from early startups through late stage startups through large SaaS companies. The last gig I had over 350 engineers working for me. And like every technical leader, when Gen AI kind of reared its head a year plus ago, I had to do the same kind of calculations all of us did, which is, hey, is this real? Is it going to solve any of my problems? Is it going to solve any of my problems better than they're already being solved with traditional technologies? And I found out kind of a cool but dirty truth that about 85%, in my estimation, of the claims that generative AI was making were just hype, which sounds really pessimistic. However, the 15% that wasn't just hype is spectacular. So spectacular that I decided to launch a startup to help companies provide practical applications to their companies using generative AI. It's just an amazing opportunity. So thanks, Pete, for having me on the panel.
You're welcome. My pleasure is I get to create spaces to interact with people like this. And the three of them, along with Jim Highsmith, have formed our initial advisory team for our lab. And before we dive into questions, and by the way, for those participating, thank you for joining us. And we are going to be opening up some questions. I've got a few prepared questions, but we'll be opening up some questions and want you to post those questions if you'd like us to explore specific topics. But before we get into those questions, maybe just a brief statement, starting with you, Nick, on just what was it about the lab that you said, hey, Pete, I'm okay to join you. Right? Hey, that sounds fun. What was it that maybe caused you to say yes to this engagement?
Yeah, great question, Pete. For me, it's just the fact that the AI itself, it's changing everything around us. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated the most has been like the agile leadership journey, and just as leaders, how we're growing. In this case, how do we use AI now to grow more as a leader? And I found practical uses day to day, and I need an outlet to share and to learn from others. And this group has provided such a great framework and just like a structured approach of like, how do we talk to one another? How do we share ideas? How do we learn from each other? And it's just been super beneficial.
Awesome. Let's go with Pete.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because leadership is at the basis of basically every successful endeavor, right? And AI is going to be a huge enabler in that it's going to give leaders tools that we've never had before. But like every tool, you can use that hammer to hit a nail, and you can use that same hammer to hit your thumb, right? So there's going to be a lot of tripping over our shoelaces with AI, not only in when to use it and where to use it, but when is it really not the right tool in the toolbox, to go back to the hammer analogy. Sometimes just because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but really that was a Phillips head screw, right? And the screwdriver is going to come in much better. I think we, as a leadership kind of tier in our organizations, are going to have to work really hard to figure out AI, figure out where it applies the best, and constantly be asking ourselves, is this the right tool for the job? And I think we are nowhere close to having all that sorted out.
Yeah. I recall there was a time when Excel didn't exist. And then it's like somebody said to me, well, when Excel came around, did we magically get better leaders? Well, no. And so the question was, well, what's going to happen with AI? Does that change the game for AI? Is AI a better Excel? We'll see. Eric, what was your thought in joining?
Well, my thought begins with asking you, hey, is there a class for how AI will affect leadership? And the answer was, no, there isn't one. How would you like to join a team that's experimenting and figuring out how AI is going to intersect with leadership? So beyond that, the reason I said yes, I'd like to join at that point, was seeing what AI has done for science. So over the last particularly decade, as AI ML has been picked up in the scientific community, it's changing the process. It's changing where we focus, how we get our scientific missions done. And what I saw in the scientific community was a slow adoption, a few early explorers, and then an explosion to the point where we're at, a peak right now, a gold rush of AI. If you go to any scientific conference that, in environmental sciences, half the abstracts will be using AI ML, and it's really transforming the balance between basic research and data, and just seeing, wow, that really changed the landscape. And then I started to see how it was influencing my leadership. So though I used to be a bench scientist and down there digging in the data, now I lead a science organization. And so I started to see it coming across in areas like, my group puts out about 70 papers a year, and I try to keep up with the content. But the essence of that is, wow, that's a lot. Well, suddenly I could have ChatGPT summarize it to whatever level I needed. So I, as a leader, could have the right level of understanding to interact, to promote their activities, to represent for them. So I see it coming now. I think we're in that early adoption phase. Like Pete said earlier, yeah, maybe right now 85% of it is not all that transformative. It's a lot of hype. But those magnificent pieces that we have out there are going to change the way we do leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're seeing here, this group, along with Jim Highsmith, has formed a cohort to kind of explore some of these questions. Our lab actually invites other leaders to come in and have some guided cohort conversations around some of these questions. And we'll be exploring a few of the questions here. And we'll share some information about our lab towards the end of the webinar. So let's dive into some questions. So I'm going to start with maybe what's on everybody's mind, which is, will the bots take over? I like to ask the question: is this the beginning of the end of the human organization? Pete, L, I'm going to cue you first on this one.
All right, I will be probably controversial and say no, or at least not today. I mean, wow. I mean, as Eric was saying, AI in itself, not new, right? The machine learning and data science kind of component of AI, I don't want to call it mature because we're still measuring it in decades, and just a handful at that. Generative AI, which is really what we're talking about today, is new, and you guys have probably seen it. The first time you get your hands on ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you're just amazed about how cool it is and how much it can do until you start trying to do real things, right? And then you realize we start to bump into the barriers that we do with any new technology when we figure out it just doesn't do everything. So I think Pete B's Excel example is fantastic, right? Because when Excel came out, it revolutionized how we do business. But we still have to do business, right? The AI, I think we're a long way from the true agentic version of generative AI that just replaces us. Maybe one day, I'm thinking that would be measured in decades at least. And remember, I'm a guy who spends all day trying to use generative AI to sell software, right? So I have my oars squarely in the waters of trying to make this stuff work. And it's promising. And there is a lot of upside for all of us. But are we ready for Skynet and Terminator to come get us? Not for a while. I think we're safe. But what that also means is we need to have our eyes on the ball and make sure all of us as leaders are using the tools at our disposal. You guys see it's moving so fast, and those tools are getting better every day. The only real mistake we can make, I think, as leaders is sitting back on the sidelines and seeing how it all shakes out, right? You have to have your body in the game to make sure that you stay relevant, and as these new features and new capabilities come out, that you can leverage them. How about that?
And just to add to that too, I think AI is its whole. It's really here to help augment, not replace humans. And it's something that I've really embraced with the co-pilots, in the fact that it's there along with you, not there to replace you. But you know what? Someone will replace you if they're not if you're not using AI. So that's the thing to think about. As a leader, how you're going to embrace AI, because if you're not going to, someone with AI will. And I think that's the big part of how we look forward to using it now in our daily work.
So the future is hybrid. Yeah. Eric, any additional comment on that, or we'll jump to our next question? So I'm not hearing our leadership, human leadership, is going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's going to definitely be a need for a human element for a long time, right? Or probably forever. But AI will dramatically change where strong leaders focus. My experience in science, again, is that where people have, as we've seen it evolved and the adoption picked up speed, as the tools became more real, as things like open AI toolkits became available. So, when I was first experimenting with it, I had my numerical recipes and C-book out, and I was trying to do AI from raw metal. Well, suddenly when you get, TensorFlow and PyTorch and all these toolkits, it's opening up, it's democratizing it, it's making it available. I expect the same thing in leadership, and it's going to change where you focus. So what you do day to day as a leader is going to change dramatically and faster than you think. So if you're not engaged, if you're not keeping track of it, those leaders that are going to outperform you.
Yeah. Remember, if you want to get your question in, feel free to share comments and questions. We'll take those. So assuming human leadership's needed for a little while, we recently ran a poll, or I recently ran a poll on LinkedIn and asked, will generative AI improve leadership? Like, unlike the Excel example, right? Is this different? Like, will it actually help improve leadership? Well, over 2/3 of respondents said it depends on the leader. So what does this mean? Well, I think we got to think about, how will AI improve leadership, or will it improve leadership? So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Eric, we'll kick you off on this one.
Sure. So one of the really important parts of this experiment for me was understanding what is leadership, right? What are the core competencies of leadership? So if you look at some of the core competencies of being a leader: communication, strategic visioning, staff development, growing your staff, right? Those are all things we would agree that are core competencies of leadership. AI will interact with all of those. I do think, from my perspective, it's much more than an Excel spreadsheet. It's much more like the birth of the internet, where if you're old like me, you can hardly remember how you got things done before there was an internet, right? I mean, if I wanted to pull a publication back in the old days, I had to go to the librarian and she'd go to the books and I'd get a copy on photocopy. And now I have a world of scientific literature at my hands. So it changed the how I'm doing that. So I think if we look at it that way, how it interacts with the core competencies of leadership, and then under those, there are use cases. So say staff development, one use case might be onboarding new staff. What can you think about in terms of how AI will help you teach the culture to new staff members? And we're all dealing with an era where people are cycling much more rapidly. People typically don't have a 30-year career at the mothership. They're on and out, but you've got to still communicate that culture to them. Can AI help us there? Yeah, we definitely know ways it can, and there's definitely already tools emerging to do that. So I think if you look at the core competencies of leadership and where AI touches that, there's a lot of exciting tools out there, and that's part of the experiments we're doing, is to see what's ready, what's raw, and what's hype going forward. So just be aware.
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think the core human pieces of leadership aren't going anywhere, right? But where AI is probably going to make an impact is as kind of an accelerator pedal, right? Where there's going to be certain lanes where Gen AI is really powerful, that the smart leader is going to be able to press that accelerator and go faster within those lanes. It could be everything from, I'll call it the kind of the rope, soap, and dope of, like you said, onboarding, helping me write reviews, helping me brainstorm for ways to deal with my team, help me come up with ideas for morale building at the next meeting. All those things are kind of low fruit, but we're going to see more and more of these. If you think of like a multi-lane highway, right? Right now, AI is really strong in, like, let's say, slow lane. But we're going to start picking up lanes as the capabilities go. And the smart leader, just like any other tool, like Eric's example of the internet, we're going to start being careful about using it and start being mad at ourselves if we're not using it.
So what I'm hearing basically is, better leaders will get better with AI. Growth mindset leaders might pick up on these things, to how I can become a better leader, and maybe leverage AI to become that better leader. But somebody who maybe lives on the spectrum of doesn't care, is not interested, is not focused on leadership, probably AI is not going to do a lot for them. Is that a fair statement? That there's a good chance the power control leadership of the past is not going away anytime soon.
I think that's fair. I think from like the perspective of like leaders, like authoritative command and control with like silos of knowledge, where generative AI especially is really democratizing a lot of information. If you want to learn something, if you want to share information, gather insights, those types of things are much more accessible now than they have been in the past. And I think that leaders that embrace that and empower their people are going to give them and contribute more than they ever have in the past.
If I can jump in with a thought on that. So the power control structure of leadership, i.e. the hierarchy you live in, probably is going to be around for a while. But a lot of times the true power in an organization is information holding, right? So there's always, when you need to put together a report, there's always that one grumpy guy in graphics department who, doesn't want to work with you. Well, guess what? You can run 16 images through generative AI and create your own imagery for your report. You don't know how to Python code? Well, just vaguely describe what you want to do, and suddenly the guy that wouldn't, share his information on how to code is out of the loop. So at this point, we're all managing little teams of AI. And I think that's going to democratize the power structure, because you will have access to information capabilities that you really did not have before. And I think that's going to be amazingly transformative in terms of the power structure, because really in any organization, the power is the control of the information and the capabilities. And AI is democratizing that quickly.
Can I jump on what Eric's saying? Because I think that's awesome. Here's what I'm already starting to see out in the marketplace. We'll see if this keeps going, but the larger legacy companies that are kind of hidebound into the old way of doing stuff, their problem has forever been being slow compared to maybe a more nimble startup that's starting to compete with them. I think what AI is going to bring there, this is to Eric's point, is now that small startup who used to be completely hamstrung by not having all the giant pool of resources that the bigger legacy company did. Now AI starts to unlock that for the little guy. I'm the little guy. I don't have a marketing department. Well, guess what? AI can be my marketing department. Hey, I don't have 350 engineers working on my product. That's okay. Using the new, code generation tools that AI brings, my 1 or 2 or 3 developers can act like 20. So I think what we're going to see is the more nimble, agile, smaller guys who embrace AI early are going to be able to bridge the gap to their legacy competitors way faster. So if you're in a smaller company, huge advantage. If you're in a bigger company, look out, right? Like you better equalize that as fast as you can.
We have a question here from the audience, Sonny Mendoza. Thanks, Sonny, for joining us today. If existing leaders may not improve with AI, how could we influence future leaders interacting with AI to make them better leaders? I love the make them better leaders. Can we really change anybody? I don't know. That's a good question. One of the things I guess I'm hearing from you guys, and maybe comment on this, AI is moving leadership down, meaning kind of like leadership from every seat. Now I can be a leader of a agent team, an AI agent team. I can have a designer, I can have a coder, I can have an analyzer, I can have, a communicator, I can, a speechwriter, right? I've got all these agents I can put to use. That's one way, I guess, you could think about leadership. I'm curious your thoughts on Sonny's questions.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on that, because I put some thought into this. So how AI, of course, the leaders who are dynamic and are out there getting the training and have adopted Agile and, really work all the time are going to start finding this themselves. And the question is more to, well, what about the leaders we'd love to see pick this up in our own organizations who aren't that energetic? I think that the key thing there is what I call lazy leadership, right? AI is going to enable leaders to take advantage of its capabilities and skills and do less work to create more value. And an example is its ability to communicate. So when you put out a memo to your staff, you can already have it check for content, check for inclusivity, write it in 4 different tones. So maybe you want to indicate, this is really serious, I need your attention, or you want it to be a joyful, celebratory memo. People who are not great communicators, it's hard to slog through all that. What if you could just put down the key points you want to get across and say, in a happy tone in my voice, please indicate, come to the company picnic. It's going to make even the leaders that are not so apt to engage with it more successful in communication and strategic visioning. What if you're not great at understanding market trends and schedules? Well, if you have a trusted source of data and you have the right AI tools, maybe it can be advising you as a trusted agent. Again, there's a lot of human interpretation in that, but just being able to take advantage of that, I think, is going to sell itself to the leadership cadre, hopefully.
Well, I think if we especially look at newly minted leaders, right, what is maybe the most common emotional thing that happens to those folks is they get overwhelmed quickly, right? There's so much to keep track of. There is so much to pay attention to, both with their teams, what their team's goals are, the individual folks that work for them. There's just so much content to be constantly processing. This is where AI kind of hits a home run right off the bat, right? I think, Nick, you might have mentioned it, the ability to summarize and the ability to just let the AI kind of lift stuff off the ground for you. I think for those folks that are new leaders, we may see that if they use AI, they can get productive much, much faster and maybe shed some of that emotional weight that tends to bog those folks down.
Yeah, that's key, Pete. I feel that with like AI, it gets you from like 0 to 80% really fast on nearly anything you want to go do. And that last 20% that's your personal human touch into the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It's I could just imagine, right? You got your EQ bot looking at your team and Zoom and seeing how everybody's doing, giving you cues on, hey, so and so is not engaged. I think some of that stuff's already happening today. There's a number of things that obviously are likely going to aid in maybe poor leadership or help ignorant or unaware leaders maybe become better. What's the risk? What's the downside of maybe becoming too dependent upon these agents? So how do we keep the humanness in in this practice of leadership when it is going to be so easy at some point to just let it all go into agents and generative AI?
I would argue that I don't think that's too much of a risk. I guess you could have it if you really get the lazy leader, right? But the lazy leaders already don't usually last, right? They're not going to be successful.
Unfortunately, bad leaders tend to get promoted often. So
I guess maybe I have a rose-colored glasses on, but I think that AI for a while is going to be an enabler only. I think Nick may have said this earlier. It's going to enhance what people do. Leaders are not. Pete, you might have a more pessimistic view of leadership than I do. I just don't see that being too much of a worry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be keys, like the human touch and when to pick up the phone, when to have the face-to-face, when to go out to grab a coffee together. Those are the human connection moments there that you can't outsource that to AI. Those are the things that you're going to build relationships. And the thing is, AI is going to enable more time for those important human moments. It's going to take away the less busy work. It's going to automate a lot of the things that today that they take up our time to go do expense reports, whatever it might be, timesheets, all those types of things today that we spend time during our work week having to go do throughout the organizational levels to automate that stuff away. So that way we can focus now more on the human time together.
Yeah, what Nick said, I think that hits it out of the park. Yeah.
I love your rose-colored glasses, guys. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm with you on some of those roses. Okay, so let's speak to the elephant in the room. Karen Kemmerling asks, do you see a male bias in LLM and AU? I don't know if I know that acronym. I would just want to say the elephant in the room. This room is, we have a male bias on this panel, and I apologize for that. One of the things we are searching is actually to get some more diversity in our advisory team as well, and something we're looking for. But let's go back to the training, right? The AI is only as good as the trained data. And we know a lot of the trained data is biased. And so a lot of these LLMs are biased. This gets us to kind of the concept of red teaming and ethics and bias in AI. So what have you guys learned, or what should leaders be aware of? Let's stay out of the tech maybe, but maybe a little bit into just what leaders should be aware of.
I think maybe 10 seconds of tech is worth it for maybe the folks in our audience that don't know what you mean by training. So these large language models have their power because they've gobbled up most of the written content in human history, right? Every book, every blog post, every magazine article, every newspaper. And where were most of where was most of that content created in most of human history? It's a preponderance of maleness. So it's going to be in there. And I think that big AI labs have done their darndest to try to kind of skew that away. But it's probably no different than if you were at the library, to use Eric's example, if, a decade ago, you had that same problem when you were reading those textbooks, right? So I think awareness is really your golden ticket, right? Know that, yep, there may be a little bias, but I'm aware, so I can cope.
Yeah, I would follow that up by saying when I talk about the shifting roles for leaders, one of your roles is going to be able to understand where your data is coming from. What was this trained on? What does it represent? What's not in it? And I think traditionally leaders have been focused on, oh great, I can get the model developed, I can get the forecast tool up and running. These are going to come very quickly. And you look at how quickly things are implemented on top of amazing databases, LLMs included, but also AI, ML. The role for the leader is going to be having to understand, what does this really represent? What are its limitations? How am I sampling it? One of the things when you use an LLM is, depending on how you tune its imagination, it's either sampling the middle of the curve and just giving you kind of a standard answer, or you let it run out on the end. Well, what's out there on the end? What does that represent? They call it hallucinations sometimes, but just unvetted information. How are you going to use that? And I think that for a leader is going to be a really important thing to understand going forward. So it'll change your focus.
Yeah, I love, Eric, during our recent podcast, you talked about, allowing it to go to the edges. You might start pulling in stuff around flat earthers and other things. And like with leadership, you're going to start to identify some very avant-garde aspects of leadership, which on one side are probably creative and innovative, and on the other side could downright be wrong and dangerous.
I think Nick said it earlier about the democratization that AI is creating, but the language models are so democratic that they don't necessarily weigh a peer-reviewed scientific journal article any more than a tweet from a 13-year-old, right? So we're going to get some skew towards the democracy, which is awesome, like Pete said, but we have to be aware again of the dangers there too.
I think that amplifies just the need for humans in the loop. We're going to need to be there to provide our own bias and judgment of like how we feel about it, not just taking what the AI says and outputting that and using that. I think that's a part of like when we talk about going from 0 to 80%, that last 20% is the human. And that's going to be the most important part for continuing on.
Yeah. We got another question here, a LinkedIn user. Thanks for joining. Do we need to rethink leadership in companies? Is there still a need for the one omnipotent or omniscient leader, or do we need to reframe it as a collective capability? This is an interesting one. One of the things I know we've talked about in our advisory group is this construct around, well, if we've got maybe more individuals running in these small teams, there's more need for alignment, which maybe is a cause for more need for strategy and connection across these different elements. What are some thoughts here on this question around is leadership a collective capacity? Is it becoming a commune of leadership versus kind of the hierarchy?
I want to kick this back to you, Pete, because you're our leadership guru, right? I don't see anything changing from the landscape we have today, where you can have leaders that are, in the middle of the bell curve, but at the tails, especially the better tail, if you have a leader that's dynamic and visionary and really sees things, I don't think we want to beat that out of the system just because we have AI as an enabler. What do you think about
that? It's one of the reasons we started the lab. It's leadership is so dynamic, and so human, it's so personal today, right? That it's hard to define. I think when Eric joined, our lab, his primary question is, what is leadership? And it's a very obtuse construct, right? I think management can be broken down to a number of activities. And I think we see AI applying in a lot of management senses. Some of the things I think I'm starting to pick up on is the signal from the noise, right? That what we're starting to see is some of the competencies, communication, emotional intelligence, being able to strategize through predictability. And that's one of the things AI is really good at, is predicting through data. To me, this is a question around data competency. And I think we've proven in the past, we were no better at data competency in the last 10, 15 years. Like, we've had a ton of data. We're not doing very well with it. Will AI help us do better with it, with data?
Well, to answer that question, from our perspective, generative AI and AI in general is lowering the cost of creativity. So the ability to explore gets so much easier when you can, the way we used to have to do, we commit a team of scientists to look at a bunch of data for a long term, and that's a big investment. And what if there's nothing there? Well, now you're right. I mean, there's environmental sensors, and everyone in their cell phone has a magnetometer. There's radars and satellites galore. We're really getting awesome data covering the planet. Well, AI can help us explore by lowering that cost of creativity, cost of curiosity, as we go out and look at, this vast pile of data. To go back to the previous question, though, one thing I think I'm interested in is, we had this discussion about agile teams. And will agile teams continue to exist in the generative AI era? And the reason it's a question in my mind is, the essence of an agile team is to get a diverse group of skills together to solve a problem. You need your database manager and your coder and your graphics designer, and you get those teams, and you have someone that's teaching them to work together and to collaborate and cooperate. And that's awesome. Well, what if people on that team don't need those other skills because they can bring in an AI agent to support them? Is it going to change the structure and the how of what we do with that? Will it change the role of, each of those individuals in their technical capacity? Is it more just leading their team of AI agents? So I think there could be very transformative effects on kind of the core, particularly for this group, of agility. And I think that's something that we need to look at, and we'll be looking at in the lab.
Yeah, Eric, I think that builds upon what Pete said earlier. If you're in a company and you need a marketing person, if you need graphics design person, we're all managers now. Even as an individual contributor, you have your own team there to support you. The interesting thing now as a leader is, with this AI team, emotional intelligence doesn't play quite as much of a role, because as many times as you ask Copilot to rewrite something for you, it's happy every single time to rewrite that 20 times for you in a row. Whereas a human, on the other hand, might give you some feedback there.
I love that.
I want to give Eric can we give a gold star for this? There's gold stars to be handed out. I'd like to give him one for the lowering the cost of creativity. So if we kind of go back to that original question from Pete B, which is, what is this going to do to that leadership group? And I think, what I was kind of poking at, hey, we have these leaders that are dynamic and have these great visions and know how to push forward to this goal that they have in their mind. If AI can unlock and lower the cost of creativity for those folks, we will get more visionary folks. We will get more dynamicism. I don't know if that's a word. Let's try it. And that's a super optimistic thing. Consider my rose-colored glasses back on.
Yeah, and in conjunction with that, there's a McKinsey report that says by 2030, 30% of the hours currently worked across the U.S. will be automated by AI. Well, that means you've freed up that time from your key staff. Hopefully this is the grinder type stuff that AI is going to, we've talked about AI as a partner. At some point, we're going to start turning things over to AI. We have that 30% with a lowered cost of creativity and lowered cost of curiosity. Gosh, imagine what your team can and should be doing. And hopefully, it's more engaging, it's more meaningful work, it's all that good stuff. Obviously, a lot of us on here are AI optimists, and I know there are the doom scrollers out there who say, we'll all be replaced by AI shortly. I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's just this amazing tool that's going to help us be more creative, explore more, make more value of the incredible amount of data that this planet is generating. And you all know what we're filling the data centers with. So there's a lot to be mined.
Hey, I'm looking forward to my avatar doing my work for me. Just create the Pete avatar and put him to work, or her to work, or whatever gender we want to make them. So one of the things that Jim Heisman and I produced a white paper a couple weeks ago, and one of the things we did, we looked back at previous technology transformations, and if AI follows those transformations, like lean and agile and software and data driven, one of the things we learned is that it's not about the technology. It's about the mindset and culture that deploys that technology. And I think what we're seeing is going to be the same with AI. It leads me to maybe one of our last questions here. It was actually maybe the first question asked. I skipped over it from Jesse Fuel. Thanks, Jesse, for joining us. It says many senior leaders, use executive coaches to help them improve their performance. However, one colleague expressed anxiety using a Gen AI as their executive coach. It felt icky. In our lab, we're actually doing the same thing. We're testing and experimenting with Pete and Current Wave, our AI catalyst coach, we call CC, as part of our AI lab, to do some experimentation on this. I'm sure many of you out there have been playing around with using AI as your own coach. Maybe Pete L, I'll start with you. What about this ickiness? What about this interactivity with an AI coach?
Well, I think what do they call it? The uncanny valley. That's been around for a while, where something is close to what we think of as human, but that closeness actually feels worse than if it was very far away. If it felt very robotic, we wouldn't worry about it. If it felt exactly human, we wouldn't worry about it. But where we are right now is we're close, but enough that we can identify the difference. And yeah, that's a little uncomfortable. So we have two ways to go. One is wait for that gap to narrow to zero, to where we don't even know if we're talking to a human or to an AI. I personally don't love that idea, but it's going to happen probably. The other is to be aware that, no, I'm talking to a machine. That machine has amazing capabilities, and I can choose to ignore that uncanny valley, that ickiness. Because if it's giving me value, I win. To just say no to it, it's kind of like a kid eating their vegetables, right? Yeah, broccoli can be icky when you're 7 years old. Doesn't mean it's not good for you. So I would counsel our questioner to get past the ickiness if you can, if you're getting value delivered to you. And if you are, that's what's important.
I almost have the opposite feeling. Oh, sorry, good.
Go ahead, Nick.
I say I almost feel the opposite. I feel when I talk to AI, I feel like I'm being less judged because I'm not talking to a person. And I feel like it won't, I mean, it's just going to tell me based on, responses and things like that. It's not so much like a human. I'm not afraid to ask dumb questions. I'm not to say, explain this like I'm in third grade. I could ask it those types of things and not feel like I'm being judged, which is super helpful, because a lot of times, like, we're somewhere, we don't want to ask that question out loud, or we don't want to ask that to even another person, just because that feeling of the bias we'll have against us then. Whereas I feel like with AI, it's there to help answer those questions, and it will do that day and night for you 24/7. So.
Yeah, I would definitely give my gold star to Nick for that one, because I didn't know we were giving gold stars, but glad we can. That to me is really important. So one of the things that I think we're going to have to look at in terms of regulation is, will you have to know that you're interacting with an AI agent going forward? Because it's going to get close. It's going to get more and more sticky. And if you know you are acting with an AI agent, sure, keep asking the question. Or as Nick said, explain it to me like I'm a third grader, right? I don't understand this problem or this thing. And you feel very comfortable doing that. Whereas with another human, you might not, and you're looking for different feedbacks. So I think that opens up a whole new level of interaction going forward.
Well, and just who has access to that interaction data, and how is that being used? And this is data that somebody might feel quite private about, in terms of, I'm trying to interact with this in a therapy session or in a development. Do I feel safe in this environment? Those are some of the interesting questions we're exploring with leadership development with AI. And if there's a coach involved, if it's a hybrid relationship, can that coach have access to those interactions or the summary data of those interactions? Those are really interesting questions. Well, we're running on our final end here, and I just want to say a few words of thanks, first of all, and thanks to the World Management Agility Forum for sponsoring, hosting this webinar series. We are going to be in Lisbon. So Nick and Eric, myself, along with some others, are going to be presenting our insights. So right now we're asking questions, but through the next number of months between now and September, we're hoping to share some more insights, some things that are coming out of the lab, at the conference. And so we encourage you to consider going to that event. There are panel talks, there are deep dives, there are master classes that we're going to be focusing around these topics. So there's a lot to talk about. We want to hear from you as well. I also just want to thank my panelists today for joining me, not only in this webinar, but also in just the lab and the exploration. And I just find it fascinating to meet with them every week and just to hear some of the examples of how they're using it, the implications of it. And I just want to put a shout out to Jim Highsmith, who's also in that group as well. And thank you to you for joining us today. My expectation is better leaders will be better with AI. And I think that means you, if you have the open mindset, the growth mindset to join a webinar like this, I think you're probably on the front edge of becoming a better leader. Our lab is committed to continue these questions. There is ways to get involved. You can get information about the AI Leadership Lab on the Agile Leadership Journey Resource Center. We'll make a link available to you if you want to find out more information. We're forming cohorts and providing access to some of these conversations and questions for leaders who are interested in that journey. And finally, on June 6th, this webinar series will continue. There is another session coming up, in this case on reimagining management towards excellence. And we've got just an incredible panel there, headed up by Dr. Annika Stieber, who is going to be talking about management for excellence. What does that look like? So we want to just say thank you for joining us today. Thank you for engaging this conversation. We know this is just an appetizer. There's a lot more to come, and we look forward to seeing you on the journey.